Private equity is one of the most complex business models in finance, but the underlying principles behind how it works are surprisingly simple. A group of investors pools money together to buy a company that's not listed on the stock exchange. They tweak a few things to make the company more profitable, and a few years later, they sell it off for a massive profit. Think of it as a car flipping business. But instead of trading cars, these savvy investors flip other real-world assets like hospitals, hotels, and even Taylor Swift's music rights.
Do you remember when Taylor Swift announced that she didn't own the rights to her own music anymore and had to record all the songs over again from scratch? Ever wonder why that happened? Well, it turns out it's the same reason Toys R Us suddenly shut down a couple years ago, and why your local hospital or nursing home recently got a lot worse. It's because they were all purchased by private equity firms, some of the shadiest, most exploitative companies in all of capitalism.
This is the story of how private equity is quietly buying everything around you. Part 1. How private equity makes money. The private equity industry has come a long way. From its inception to the first ever large-scale buyout in 1901, when J.P. Morgan purchased the Carnegie Steel Company for $480 million, the industry has grown steadily. Today, it's a multi-trillion-dollar empire largely dominated by companies like Blackstone, KKR, Apollo Global Management, and the Carlyle Group. Now, these firms have several ways of raising capital. Some of them are backed by wealthy investors who provide money, but are not involved in the day-to-day running of the company. However, institutional investors like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and insurance companies are by far the biggest financiers of private equity companies. They provide a large chunk of capital, ensuring that these firms have what they need to get what they want. But just in case that capital isn't enough, private equity firms have one more card to play, and it's called leveraged buyout, or LBO for short. Essentially, an LBO is when a private equity firm acquires a company using mostly borrowed money. Think of it this way. You and your best friend want to buy out a popular ice cream shop in your neighborhood for $50,000, but you only have $10,000. So, you go to the bank and ask for a $40,000 loan using the assets of the ice cream shop as collateral. If the business fails, the bank takes over everything, and you and your friend lose $10,000. But if things go as planned, you might sell the business for $100,000 a few years later. The bank takes $50,000 as principal and interest, then you and your buddy will walk away with a $50,000 profit. Now, that right there is how private equity makes money. But the real-life examples make this little ice cream shop story look like chicken change. Part 2. The $5.6 billion beat that shocked Wall Street. In 1986, KKR purchased a struggling grocery chain named Safeway for $5.6 billion. But guess what? KKR's total investment in the deal was just $126 million. The rest of the money was borrowed from the bank against Safeway's assets. Now, here's where things get interesting. After taking over Safeway, KKR appointed a new management team and the grocery chain was overhauled. The supply chain and logistics were streamlined, customer experience improved, underperforming stores were shut, and non-core assets were sold. That alone generated an extra $2 billion that was injected into the business, and the result was absolutely remarkable. Safeway's operating margins rose from 1% to 9%, and its debt dropped from $5 billion to $3 billion. This stunning turnaround proved that KKR's bet on Safeway was the right decision, and the numbers ultimately confirmed it. By the time KKR sold its last stake, its total profit from the Safeway buyout had exceeded $7 billion. Now, That's a whole lot of money to make, especially on an investment that was funded largely by debt. But many years down the line, the Blackstone Group pulled off something even more extraordinary. Part 3. The greatest leveraged buyout in history. It all started in 2007 when Blackstone acquired Hilton Hotels using $5.4 billion of its own money and an astonishing $20.6 billion loan from 26 financial institutions, including the Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. Mind you, this daring takeover happened a few months before the Great Recession, so the timing wasn't particularly great. Also, analysts were concerned about the massive debt load of the leveraged buyout and the declining revenue of Hilton Hotels. And, unfortunately, they were right. Shortly after the buyout, Hilton's global revenue fell by 20%, while the company's debt load continued to rise. In fact, at some point, Blackstone officially wrote off every single penny it invested in Hilton from its balance sheet. And CEO Steve Schwarzman described the buyout as a catastrophic mistake. But just when it seemed like it was all over, the situation took a dramatic turn. You see, once Blackstone completed the deal, they installed Christopher Nassetta as the new CEO. That decision made sense on paper because Nassetta had plenty of experience in the hospitality business. Hilton Hotels, however, was a different kettle of fish. So, to understand the problem, Nassetta spent his first 3 months on the job, traveling from one Hilton hotel branch to another. During that tour, he spoke to people across all levels of the business, managers, porters, and even cooks. What he found was a company that had lost its direction. No unified culture, no accountability, no shared vision. But before he fixed those issues, he sacked 80% of the previous management team. Next, he introduced a new organizational culture built around accountability and central coordination while promoting Hilton Hotels as the business of people serving people. In addition, Nassetta embraced franchising, thereby allowing the company to expand rapidly without necessarily injecting new capital. That move saw Hilton expand into new markets in the Middle East and Europe. The business registered its presence in over 30 new countries, and the number of hotels under its control increased by 65%. To lock in those gains, Blackstone restructured Hilton's debt, cutting nearly $4 billion from the company's balance sheet. And all of a sudden, what seemed like a bad investment turned into the best leveraged buyout in history. Because ultimately, Hilton Hotels went public and Blackstone sold its stake at different times for a combined profit of $14 billion. That's double what KKR made from the entire Safeway deal. But sometimes these billion-dollar profits come at a very real human cost. Part 4. When private equity gets personal. The Taylor Swift story. Back in 2004, 14-year-old Taylor Swift moved to Nashville with one dream in mind: to become a country pop star. Although she was barely known at the time, Scott Borchetta believed in that dream. So, he signed her up to his Big Machine record label. As part of the deal, Borchetta acquired the rights to the master recordings of Swift's first 6 albums. That means she wouldn't be able to perform any of the songs on the album without his consent. But it didn't seem like it was an issue. Well, that was until 2018 when the contract expired. Swift moved on to join Republic Records and Universal Music Group, while the rights to some of her most memorable work remained with the Big Machine record label. The whole thing was already messed up at this point, but apparently the worst was yet to come. In 2019, Borchetta sold the label to an investment fund named Ithaca Holdings for $300 million, And that's where everything fell apart. You see, Ithaca Holdings is owned by Scooter Braun, a popular investor who once managed Justin Bieber and the man whom Swift accused of manipulative bullying. In other words, her former label boss had just sold her life's work to someone she openly despised. The backlash was immediate. Fans flooded Borchetta's social media, and some took things to a disturbing extreme, sending death threats to his family. By November 2020, Borchetta sold the Masters again, this time to Shamrock Holdings, also for $300 million. But that didn't solve Swift's problem. Her work was still being passed around like a tradable asset, and she had no control over any of it. So she fought back the only way she could by re-recording her albums from scratch starting in 2021, releasing them as Taylor's version. But she never stopped trying to reclaim the rights to the original recordings, and after many years of failed attempts, she bought them back for an undisclosed fee in May 2025. For Swift, it was a years-long fight to reclaim ownership of her own art. For private equity, it was just another deal. But when private equity moves into something far more essential than music, when it starts buying hospitals, the stakes aren't measured in royalties, they're measured in lives. Part 5. The dark side of private equity. Every time a private equity firm takes over a large company, around 13% of jobs are cut. To put this in perspective, PE firms contributed to the loss of 1.3 million retail jobs between 2009 and 2019. Also, the working conditions at companies owned by PE firms have been less than ideal. The workers at such organizations reportedly pay higher insurance costs while getting fewer retirement contributions and salary increments. It is widely believed that these stringent policies are adopted as a way of cutting operational costs. Yet, some of them end up running the companies in their care into the ground. According to new research, around 20% of large companies acquired through leveraged buyouts go bankrupt within 10 years. That's a frightening stat, but it gets worse when you narrow the scope to companies within the healthcare industry.
It's a CBS News investigation that finds healthcare institutions that Americans rely on are being taken apart and then shut down by investors who are looking for profits.
In 2025, 4 out of 9 healthcare bankruptcies were companies owned by private equity firms. This, unfortunately, isn't a recent problem. It's been happening for decades, and if there's one story that captures every part of this nightmare, it's the tragic case of Steward Health Care. In 2010, Cerberus Capital Management bought 6 non-profit hospitals from the Boston Catholic Archdiocese. It then rebranded these hospitals as Steward Health Care and embarked on an aggressive expansion campaign that added 40 hospitals to the chain. Everything seemed fine at first. But then, in 2016, Cerberus Capital sold the land and buildings where these hospitals operate to Medical Properties Trust for nearly $1.3 billion. This was a sale-leaseback agreement, meaning that the hospitals could continue using the buildings, but they now had to pay rent to Medical Properties Trust. Now, sales-leaseback is not an illegal practice. In fact, it's one of the most common strategies that private equity uses to generate liquidity and improve its financial metrics. But the problem here is how the money was spent. On its website, Cerberus Capital claimed that the funds would be used to pay off corporate debt and drive expansion, amongst other things. But in reality, most of the money was used to pay dividends. The company's CEO at the time, Dr. Ralph de la Tour, received $90 million from the largesse, and he went on a shopping spree. He bought himself a luxury 190-foot yacht named Amiral for $40 million and a custom-made fishing boat for $15 million. As if that wasn't bad enough, Cerberus Capital bought 2 private jets to fly its top executives across the world. And while all that was happening, the hospitals under its control were deteriorating. Yet somehow, the firm was able to cover its tracks for many years. But in 2020, something unexpected happened. Cerberus Capital suddenly announced that it had given all of its shares to a group of physicians led by Dr. De La Torre in exchange for a $350 million convertible bond. By virtue of that agreement, the new Steward Health Care management basically promised to pay Cerberus $350 million plus interest. But here's what makes the deal really complicated. If at some point in the future Steward becomes very successful or hits certain milestones, Cerberus has the right to turn that bond back into ownership shares. To put it simply, this deal was structured to extract maximum value while offloading all of the risk onto the hospitals and the patients inside them. And that's exactly what happened, because in May 2024, Steward Health Care declared bankruptcy.
Millions of patients and tens of thousands of employees are in limbo tonight after one of the largest hospital bankruptcies in history.
When investigations were conducted to find out why, the trail led straight back to Cerberus Capital. Nurses testified to conditions that were nothing short of shocking. Hospital kitchens had been permanently shut down, meaning staff sometimes gave their own food to patients. Emergency units were understaffed and stripped of basic supplies.
And I can tell you, we always struggled to have enough staff, enough equipment, enough supplies to keep our patients safe.
Tragically, this mismanagement led to the avoidable deaths of multiple patients across the Steward.
At Steward Hospitals, this included 2 patients at Holy Family Hospital in Methuen who died in the emergency department. At Good Samaritan, 2 patients died after spending hours in a significantly understaffed emergency department. One 81-year-old gentleman came in for chemotherapy for his pancreatic cancer, and by the time staff got to him, he was dead.
Further investigation also showed that some of the hospitals lacked life-saving equipment, and that too has caused significant harm to patients in the past. In October 2023, Sungaida Rashid delivered a baby girl at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center, one of the hospitals controlled by Steward Health. Her husband, Nabil Hake, described the arrival of the child as blissful. However, his excitement didn't last long. After delivery, the doctors discovered that his wife's liver was bleeding. They mentioned that an embolization coil could fix the damage, but the hospital had none. According to the nurses, the supplier of the coil had recovered them a few weeks earlier after Steward Health failed to pay for them. This crisis affected many other hospital supplies too, including bereavement boxes.
Sadly enough, sometimes babies die, newborn babies die, and the practice is to place the baby's remains in a bereavement box and take it to the morgue. Steward didn't pay the vendor, and there weren't any bereavement boxes, and nurses were forced to put babies' remains in cardboard shipping boxes.
Now, that isn't just greed, it's borderline wickedness. But when Dr. De La Torre was invited by Congress to explain his role in the mess, he claimed that his constitutional rights were being infringed upon and ultimately declined the invitation. That, unfortunately, is the world we live in today. A world where the financial returns of a handful of investors can outweigh the safety of ordinary people. And that should concern all of us. Because unlike publicly traded corporations, private equity firms don't need your approval or vote. Yet they quietly control the hospitals you visit, the stores where you shop, the homes you rent, and the music you stream, operating in the background and collecting billions in profit. They work in the shadows, and when things fall apart, it's everyone else who pays the price. Sadly, this is the same financial engineering that has reshaped many household names across America, and right now, it's quietly moving into industries you haven't even thought about yet. So, if you really want to understand how smart money builds empires and bends entire industries to its will, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.